I am sorry, but there must be some mistake. My grandfather died 2 years ago. I said those words into my phone, standing in my apartment kitchen, completely certain that the woman on the other end had the wrong number. She was calling from a nursing home in Ohio, asking about unpaid bills for a patient named Harold Evans. My grandfather's name. My grandfather, who had been dead for over 2 years. Sir, I am looking at the file right now. Harold Evans. Date of birth March 15th, 1941. Emergency contact listed as Richard Evans. Is that your father? Yes, but the account shows almost $47,000 in unpaid bills. We have been trying to reach your father for months, but his phone is disconnected. Your number was listed as the secondary contact. That is impossible. My grandfather passed away in October 2022. We had a funeral. I gave the eulogy. He is buried in Riverside Cemetery in Chicago. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When the woman spoke again, her voice was careful, confused. Sir, your grandfather is not dead. He has been a patient at Shady Oaks Care Center for over 2 years. He is in room 217 right now, and he has been asking about his grandson Samuel for as long as anyone here can remember. My knees went weak. I had to grab the counter to keep from falling. This could not be real. This had to be some kind of scam, some identity theft scheme, some terrible misunderstanding. Because if it was not, if what this woman was saying was true, then everything I believed about my family was a lie. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Samuel Evans. I just turned 21, and I thought becoming an adult meant freedom. Instead, it meant finally being old enough to uncover the darkest secret my family had ever kept. This is the story of how I discovered that my grandfather was alive, how my parents had hidden him away and told everyone he was dead, and what happened when I finally found out the truth. I grew up in Chicago, in a brownstone on the north side that had been in my family for 3 generations. My parents were Richard and Patricia Evans, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. My father was a financial advisor with his own firm. My mother was a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties. They drove nice cars, wore nice clothes, took nice vacations. Everything about them was polished and presentable. My grandfather, Harold Evans, was my father's father. He had lived in that brownstone his whole life, raising my father there after my grandmother died young from breast cancer. He was a retired electrician who had worked for the city for 40 years, a union man who believed in hard work and honesty and taking care of your family. He was also one of the kindest people I have ever known. Some of my earliest memories are of Grandpa Harold. He would pick me up from school when my parents were working late, which was often. He would be waiting at the gate in his old brown jacket, the one with the patched elbows, waving when he saw me come out. The other kids had their moms or nannies or au pairs. I had my grandfather, and I would not have traded him for anything. He would make me grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, the same meal every time, because he knew it was my favorite. He had perfected it over the years, using sharp cheddar and real butter, grilling the bread until it was golden brown and slightly crispy. He would cut the sandwich diagonally, the way I liked it, and serve the soup in a blue bowl that had been his mother's. We would sit at his little kitchen table and eat together, and he would ask me about my day. Really ask. Not just the distracted questions my parents threw at me while checking their phones. He would help me with my homework, even though the math had changed so much since his day that he barely understood it. He would sit beside me at the dining room table, squinting at the problems through his reading glasses, trying to figure out the new methods they were teaching. When he could not help with the math, he would help with the history instead, telling me stories about the events we were studying that made them come alive in a way my textbooks never could. He made the Depression real by telling me about his parents, about how his father had lost his job and they had eaten beans for dinner every night for a year. He made World War II real by telling me about his uncle who had died at Normandy, about the telegram that had arrived on a sunny Tuesday afternoon and changed his grandmother's life forever. He would tell me stories about the old days, about growing up in Chicago during the 60s and 70s, about the city before it became what it is now. He remembered when the neighborhood was different, when everyone knew everyone, when kids played in the streets until dark and nobody worried. He remembered the riots after King was killed, the smoke rising over the city, the fear and the anger, and the hope that something might finally change. He remembered the blizzard of 1967, when the snow came up to the windows and the whole city shut down for a week, and he and his friends had built snow forts in the street and pelted each other with snowballs until their mothers called them in for dinner. He had a way of making the past feel present, of connecting me to a history I had never lived but could somehow feel in my bones. Listening to him, I understood that I was part of something bigger than myself, part of a chain of generations stretching back through time. He made me feel rooted in a way my parents, with their focus on the future and upward mobility, never could. He lived on the 3rd floor of the brownstone, in the apartment that had been his since before I was born. It was a small space, just a bedroom and a bathroom and a little sitting room where he watched television, but it was filled with his things. Photographs of my grandmother, who had died before I was born, covered almost every surface. She had been beautiful, with dark hair and bright eyes that seemed to sparkle even in old black and white photos. Grandpa talked about her often, about how they had met at a dance, about how nervous he had been to ask her father for permission to marry her, about the 50 years they had expected to have together and the 20 they actually got. Books about history and science lined his shelves, books that he read over and over again, their spines cracked and their pages yellowed. He had a particular love for astronomy, for the vastness of the universe and humanity's small place within it. On clear nights when I was young, he would take me up to the roof and show me the stars, pointing out constellations and telling me the myths behind their names. A collection of vintage tools hung on one wall, tools that he kept in perfect condition, even though he rarely used them anymore. He had been an electrician his whole working life, and he took pride in his craft. Anyone can wire a house, he used to say, but doing it right, doing it so it lasts, that takes skill. He had tried to teach me some of what he knew, showing me how circuits worked, how to read a wiring diagram, how to respect electricity without being afraid of it. I loved him. I loved him the way children love the adults who actually pay attention to them, who make them feel seen and valued and important. My parents were busy people, always working, always distracted, always promising to spend time with me later. Later never seemed to come. There was always another deal to close, another client to meet, another property to show. I was an afterthought in their lives, something to be managed rather than cherished. Grandpa was there. He was always there. When I had a nightmare, he was the one who came to my room and sat with me until I fell back asleep. When I got bullied at school, he was the one who taught me how to stand up for myself. When I won the spelling bee in 5th grade, he was the one in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. My parents had a meeting they could not reschedule. Looking back now, I wonder if I knew even then that something was wrong with our family, that the coldness between my parents and their own father was not normal. They rarely visited his apartment, even though it was just one floor above us. They spoke to him with a politeness that felt forced, like they were talking to a stranger rather than a family member. They never asked about his life, his interests, his feelings. They just waited for him to go back upstairs so they could get on with their important lives. Things started to change when I was about 15. Grandpa started forgetting things. Small things at first, like where he put his keys or what day of the week it was. Then bigger things like my name sometimes, or whether he had eaten lunch. He would tell me the same story 3 times in one conversation, not realizing he had already told it. He would get confused about the year, thinking it was decades ago, asking about people who had been dead for years. My parents took him to doctors. They did tests, scans, evaluations. The diagnosis was Alzheimer's, early stage but progressing. They said he would get worse over time, that there was no cure, only management. They said he would eventually need full-time care. I remember how my father reacted to that news. Not with sadness, not with concern for his own father, but with irritation, with calculation. He was already thinking about what this would cost, how much time it would take, how inconvenient it would be. I remember thinking, even at 15, that there was something wrong with that reaction, that a son should feel something more than annoyance when his father gets sick. Over the next 2 years, Grandpa's condition got worse. He needed more help with daily tasks. He could not cook for himself anymore, could not always remember to take his medications, sometimes got confused and tried to leave the house in the middle of the night. My parents hired caregivers to help, but they complained about the cost constantly. Every expense was tracked, every dollar resented. I was 17 when they told me Grandpa was going into a nursing home. They framed it as a positive thing, a way to make sure he got the care he needed. But I could see the relief in their eyes. They were tired of dealing with him. They wanted their lives back. The fact that their father was dying in slow motion was just an inconvenience to be managed. I wanted to visit him after he moved, but my parents always had excuses. The nursing home was far away, they said. He would not recognize me anyway. It would just upset him to have visitors. Better to let him adjust, to give him time. I was busy with school, with college applications, with 1,000 things that fill a teenager's life. I let them convince me. I let weeks turn into months without seeing him. Then, in October of my senior year, my mother called me. I was in my dorm room, halfway through my first semester at college in Boston. She was crying. "It is Grandpa," she said. "He passed away last night. Peacefully, in his sleep. He did not suffer." I flew home for the funeral. It was a small service, just family and a few of Grandpa's old friends from his union days. The casket was closed, which my parents said was because Grandpa had not wanted people to see him that way. I gave a eulogy, talking about grilled cheese sandwiches and homework help and all the ways he had been there for me when my parents were not. I cried at that funeral. I cried for the grandfather I had lost, for the years we would not have together, for all the things I had not said when I had the chance. I watched them lower the casket into the ground at Riverside Cemetery, next to the grave of the grandmother I had never known. I threw dirt on the lid. I said goodbye, and then I went back to my life. I visited his grave every time I came home. I would bring flowers, usually carnations because they were his favorite, and I would talk to him the way you talk to the dead when you miss them. I would tell him about my classes, about my friends, about the girl I was dating. I would tell him I was sorry I had not visited more when he was alive. I would tell him I loved him. For 2 years, I mourned my grandfather, and for 2 years, he was alive in a nursing home in Ohio, wondering why his family had abandoned him. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was finishing up my junior year, about to start a summer internship at a marketing firm. I had just gotten back to my apartment from my last exam when my phone rang. Unknown number, Ohio area code. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. Something made me say hello. "Is this Samuel Evans?" "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Diane, and I am calling from Shady Oaks Care Center in Columbus, Ohio. I am the billing coordinator. We have been trying to reach your family about some outstanding bills." That was how I found out. Not from some dramatic revelation. Not from a deathbed confession. but from a billing coordinator trying to collect $47,000 in unpaid nursing home fees. After I got off the phone with Diane, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, trying to make sense of what she had told me. My grandfather was alive. He was in a nursing home in Ohio, over 500 miles from Chicago, in a state where we had no family, no connections, no reason for him to be. He had been there for over 2 years, and no one had paid his bills in months. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake. Maybe there was another Harold Evans, born on the same day, with a son named Richard. Maybe this was some kind of identity mix-up that could be easily sorted out. But even as I thought it, I knew it was not true. The dates lined up too perfectly. The family details were too accurate. This was my grandfather, and my parents had lied. I called my father. He did not answer. I called my mother. She did not answer either. I left messages, trying to keep my voice calm, asking them to call me back, saying it was important. They did not respond. So I did the only thing I could think of. I got in my car and drove to Ohio. It was an 8-hour drive from Boston to Columbus. I made it in 7, stopping only for gas and coffee. My mind raced the entire way, replaying every conversation I had ever had with my parents about Grandpa, looking for signs that they were lying. The closed casket, the distant nursing home, the excuses not to visit. It all made a terrible kind of sense now. I arrived at Shady Oaks Care Center just after midnight. It was a squat brown building on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that looked clean but institutional, caring but impersonal. The parking lot was nearly empty at that hour. A single light burned in the lobby. I pushed through the front doors. A young woman sat at the reception desk, looking surprised to see anyone at this hour. "Can I help you?" "I am here to see Harold Evans. Room 217. Visiting hours do not start until 9 in the morning. You will have to come back." I just drove 8 hours to get here. I just found out my grandfather is alive after being told he was dead for 2 years. I am not leaving until I see him. The woman stared at me. I must have looked like a crazy person, wild-eyed and desperate, still wearing the clothes I had put on that morning for my exam. But something in my voice must have convinced her, because she picked up the phone and called someone. 10 minutes later, a nurse appeared. Her name tag said she was called Margaret. She was a heavy-set woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "You are Harold's grandson?" "Yes." "Samuel. He talks about you all the time. Every day. He asks when Samuel is coming to visit. We did not know how to reach you. The only contact we had was your father, and he stopped answering months ago. Can I see him? Please." She led me down a long hallway, past closed doors with numbers on them, past the sounds of televisions and medical equipment and the occasional cough. The smell was the same as every nursing home I had ever been in. Disinfectant and something else underneath, something older and sadder. We stopped at room 217. Margaret knocked gently, then pushed the door open. "Harold, someone is here to see you." I stepped into the room. It was small and sparse, with a single bed and a chair and a television mounted on the wall. The walls were bare except for a single photograph, and when I looked closer, I saw that it was a picture of me. My high school graduation photo, the same one that hung in my parents' living room. And in the bed, propped up on pillows, was my grandfather. He was thinner than I remembered, his face more lined, his hair completely white now. He looked old in a way he had not before, like the 2 years of abandonment had aged him a decade. But his eyes were the same, those bright blue eyes that had looked at me with love for as long as I could remember. "Grandpa." He stared at me for a long moment. I could see him trying to place me, trying to match my face with the memories that still flickered in his damaged mind. "Samuel." His voice was hoarse, uncertain. "Is that you?" "It is me, Grandpa. I am here." and then he started crying, not soft, dignified tears, but great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. He reached out his arms toward me, and I crossed the room and held him, feeling how frail he had become, how small and vulnerable. "You came," he kept saying. "You finally came. I knew you would. I knew you would not forget me." I held him for a long time, crying myself, trying to understand how we had gotten here, how my parents could have done this, how they could have abandoned their own father, told everyone he was dead, and just walked away. When we finally pulled apart, I sat in the chair beside his bed and took his hand. His skin was paper-thin, almost translucent. "Grandpa, I need to ask you something. Do you know how you got here? Do you remember coming to this place?" He nodded slowly. "Your father brought me. He said it was temporary. He said it was just until they found a better place. He said he would come back. But he did not come back." "No. Nobody came. I waited and waited. I asked the nurses to call him. They said the phone was disconnected. I asked them to find you. They said they did not know how." He squeezed my hand with what little strength he had. "I thought you forgot about me, Samuel. I thought everyone forgot. I did not forget. I thought you were dead. They told me you died. They had a funeral. I gave a speech." His eyes widened with confusion. "A funeral? But I am not dead." "I know, Grandpa. I know that now." I spent the rest of the night in that room, sitting beside my grandfather's bed, listening to him talk in fragments about the past 2 years. He did not remember everything. His memory was still damaged by the Alzheimer's, but he remembered enough. He remembered being brought to this place, a long drive from Chicago, his son telling him it was temporary. He remembered the first weeks of waiting, expecting someone to come back for him. He remembered the slow realization that no one was coming. He remembered asking the staff to contact his family over and over again. He remembered the phone calls that went unanswered, the letters that were never returned. He remembered the loneliness, the confusion, the growing certainty that he had been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love him. "I thought I did something wrong," he said at one point, his voice breaking. "I thought maybe I said something, did something, to make everyone hate me. I could not remember what it was. I kept trying to remember so I could apologize." "You did not do anything wrong, Grandpa. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault." But even as I said it, I knew it was not enough. Words could not undo 2 years of abandonment. Words could not give him back the time he had lost, the family gatherings he had missed, the holidays he had spent alone in this sterile room, wondering why nobody loved him anymore. When morning came, I asked to speak with the nursing home administrator. Her name was Carol Washington, a professional woman in her 50s who looked like she had seen everything there was to see in this business. "I want to know everything," I told her. "Every bill, every payment, every contact your staff made with my family. I want documentation of all of it." She pulled up the records on her computer. What she showed me was damning. My grandfather had been admitted to Shady Oaks in September of 2022, 1 month before my parents told me he had died. The initial paperwork was all in order, signed by my father, with payment guaranteed from my grandfather's pension and Social Security benefits. For the first year, the bills were paid on time, automatically drafted from an account in my father's name. Then, about 14 months ago, the payments stopped. The nursing home sent letters, made phone calls, tried everything they could to contact my father. Nothing worked. The phone number was disconnected. The letters came back undelivered. It was like my parents had simply vanished. "We could not just put him out on the street," Carol said. "He has no other family that we knew of. He has dementia, so we kept caring for him and hoped that eventually someone would come forward." "Why did you not contact Adult Protective Services or the police?" "We did, about 6 months ago. They opened an investigation, but your father was very good at covering his tracks. He had changed addresses, changed phone numbers. They could not find him. But they had found me. My number was listed as a secondary contact in the original paperwork, probably because my parents never imagined I would be called. They thought they had gotten away with it. They thought Grandpa would just die in this nursing home, forgotten and alone, and no one would ever know what they had done. I spent the next week in Ohio, visiting my grandfather every day, learning everything I could about his situation. The nursing home staff adored him. Even with his memory problems, even with his confusion, he was kind and grateful and never complained. He thanked them for every meal, every bath, every small kindness. He was everything my parents were not. The nurses told me stories about him, about the 2 years he had spent there waiting for his family, how he would shuffle to the front desk every morning and ask if anyone had called, how he would sit by the window in the afternoon, watching the parking lot, hoping to see a familiar car pull in, how he would talk about his grandson Samuel, about the smart boy who was going to college, about how proud he was of me. They told me about the holidays he had spent alone, Thanksgiving dinners in the communal dining room, surrounded by strangers, while I was at home with my parents eating turkey and thinking about the grandfather I had lost. Christmas mornings when the staff tried to make things festive, putting up decorations and playing carols, while he sat in his room looking at my graduation photo, the only picture of family he had. They told me about the day he stopped asking. About 6 months before I found him, he had simply given up. He stopped going to the front desk. He stopped watching the parking lot. He stopped talking about when his family would come. The nurses said it was the saddest thing they had ever seen, watching hope drain out of someone so slowly and completely. I also learned the truth about his finances. Before the Alzheimer's took hold, my grandfather had been a careful saver. 40 years as a city electrician had earned him a solid pension, about $3,800 a month. He had Social Security benefits on top of that, another $2,200. He owned the third-floor apartment in our brownstone outright, no mortgage, no debt, worth at least $300,000 in the current market. And he had savings nearly $200,000 accumulated over a lifetime of frugality, of brown bag lunches and home haircuts, and vacations that never went farther than a lake cabin in Wisconsin. All of that was gone now. My father had power of attorney, granted back when Grandpa was first diagnosed, to help him manage his affairs. It was supposed to be a tool for protection. Instead, it became a tool for theft. I obtained bank records, property records, everything I could get my hands on. The paper trail was clear and damning. Within 3 months of Grandpa entering the nursing home, my father had transferred the $200,000 in savings to his own account. He had sold the third-floor apartment to himself for $50,000, a fraction of its value, using his power of attorney to sign both sides of the transaction. He had redirected the pension and Social Security payments to a new account in his own name. Over 2 years, my father had stolen nearly $500,000 from his own father, and he had used that money to live well. New cars, home renovations, expensive vacations. The cruise to the Caribbean that my mother had posted about on social media, bragging about their good fortune. All of it paid for with money that should have been taking care of a man they had thrown away like garbage. I drove back to Chicago with murder in my heart. I went straight to my parents' house, the brownstone where I had grown up, where my grandfather had lived until my father threw him away. The building looked the same as always, solid and respectable, a monument to 4 generations of family history. But now I saw it differently. Now I saw a crime scene. Now I saw the place where my parents had plotted to steal from a dying man and hide the evidence. I did not call ahead. I did not give them warning. I just showed up on their doorstep and rang the bell. My mother answered. She was wearing workout clothes, probably just back from her yoga class. her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. When she saw me, her face went pale. "Samuel, what are you doing here? You did not tell us you were coming." "We need to talk." "Where is Dad?" "He is in his office." "What is this about? You look upset." I pushed past her into the house. The foyer looked different than I remembered, freshly painted, with new light fixtures and a marble table that had not been there before. More renovations paid for, with my grandfather's money. My father was sitting in his home office, working at his computer. The office had been upgraded too, with a new desk and leather chair and built-in bookshelves that must have cost a fortune. He looked up when I walked in, and for just a moment I saw fear in his eyes. Then he covered it with that smooth, professional mask he always wore. "Samuel, this is a surprise. Is everything okay?" "No, Dad. Everything is not okay. I just got back from Ohio. From Shady Oaks Care Center. From Grandpa's room." The mask slipped, just for a second, but I saw it. The calculation, the panic, the quick assessment of how bad this was going to be. His fingers froze over his keyboard. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "I do not know what you are talking about. Do not lie to me. Not anymore. I know he is alive. I have been with him for the past week. I know you dumped him there and told everyone he was dead. I know you stole all his money. I know everything." My mother had followed me into the office. She was crying now, those practiced tears she always used when she wanted sympathy. She had cried the same way at the fake funeral, and I had believed her then. I would not make that mistake again. "Samuel, you do not understand. It was so hard taking care of him. The disease, the confusion, the constant needs. We did what we had to do." "What you had to do? You told me my grandfather was dead. You had a funeral. I gave a eulogy over an empty casket. How could you do that?" "We thought it would be easier," my father said. His voice was calm, reasonable, like he was explaining a simple business decision to a slow client. He did not recognize anyone anymore. He was not really living, not in any meaningful way, and the cost of care was becoming unsustainable. We had to make hard choices. Hard choices? You stole $200,000 from him. You sold his apartment out from under him for 1/10 of its value. You redirected his pension to your own account while he sat in a nursing home wondering why his family abandoned him. Those are not hard choices. Those are crimes. Watch your tone, son. You do not understand the pressures we were under. The real estate market has been difficult. Your mother's agency has had a bad year. We had expenses, obligations. You had a father who worked his whole life to build something, a father who raised you, who loved you, who would have done anything for you, and you threw him away so you could renovate your kitchen." My father stood up from his desk. His face was hard now, all pretense of warmth gone. This was the real man, the one behind the professional smile and the polished demeanor. This was the man who could abandon his father and sleep soundly every night. Your grandfather is 83 years old with advanced dementia. He does not know what year it is. He does not know who the president is. Half the time, he does not know his own name. What exactly do you think we owed him? Everything. You owed him everything. He raised you. He worked his whole life to give you opportunities. He loved you, and this is how you repay him. Love does not pay the bills. Love does not cover the cost of 24-hour care. We did the math, Samuel. Keeping him in a quality facility would have bankrupted us. So we made a practical decision. You made a criminal decision. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud. You are going to prison. My mother gasped. My father just laughed. No one is going to prison. Your grandfather has dementia. He cannot testify. There is no proof of anything except that we placed him in a care facility and stopped being able to afford the payments. That is not a crime. That is just life. There is plenty of proof. Bank records, property transfers. The fake funeral you staged. The lies you told to everyone, including me. I have already been in touch with a lawyer and with the police. That got his attention. The smugness faded, replaced by something uglier. You would do that to your own parents? After everything we have done for you, what have you done for me? Besides lie to me my entire life? Besides teach me that family is something you throw away when it becomes inconvenient? Grandpa did more for me than you ever did, and I am going to make sure he gets justice. I walked out of that house and never went back. The legal process took almost a year. I retained an elder law attorney who specialized in cases of financial exploitation. Her name was Victoria Simmons, and she had spent 20 years fighting for elderly victims who had been betrayed by their own families. When I told her my story, she did not even blink. I have seen this before, she said, more often than you would believe. Family members who see their elderly relatives as ATMs, who cannot wait for them to die, and when they do not die fast enough, decide to speed up the inheritance by other means. We gathered evidence, bank statements showing the transfers, property records showing the fraudulent sale of my grandfather's apartment, documentation from the nursing home showing the abandoned bills. We subpoenaed phone records and email accounts. We interviewed neighbors who had wondered what happened to Harold. We found the company that had staged the fake funeral, a disreputable operation that specialized in cheap services and asked few questions, who admitted they had been paid $3,000 to provide an empty casket and a convincing ceremony. We filed criminal charges against my parents for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. We also filed a civil lawsuit to recover my grandfather's stolen assets. My father hired expensive lawyers and tried every trick in the book to delay and obstruct. He filed motion after motion, requested continuance after continuance, did everything possible to drag out the process and drain my resources. But Victoria had warned me about this. They are counting on you giving up, she said. They think you are just a kid, that you will run out of money or energy or patience. Show them they are wrong. I took out student loans to pay the legal bills. I worked part-time jobs on top of my classes. I did whatever it took to keep fighting, because every time I felt tired, every time I wanted to quit, I thought about my grandfather sitting in that nursing home, watching the parking lot, waiting for someone who never came. The criminal trial began on a gray Monday in November, almost exactly 2 years after my parents had staged the fake funeral. The courtroom was packed with observers, journalists, and advocates who had heard about the case. Elder abuse was a hot topic that year, and my parents' story had become something of a cause célèbre. My parents portrayed themselves as loving family members who had simply made difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. My father took the stand in an expensive suit, his voice calm and measured, explaining how the burden of caring for his father had become too much, how the costs were unsustainable, how they had made the heartbreaking decision to place him in a care facility, and how they had told me he was dead only to spare me pain. Samuel was away at college, my father said, looking at the jury with practiced sincerity. He was building his own life. We did not want to burden him with the slow decline of his grandfather. We thought we were protecting him. Their lawyers argued that my grandfather's dementia meant he could not reliably report on his own experiences. They claimed that the financial arrangements were within the scope of the power of attorney, that my father had every legal right to manage his father's assets as he saw fit. They argued that the fake funeral was a misguided attempt to spare me pain, not evidence of criminal intent. They put character witnesses on the stand, colleagues of my father who testified to his professionalism and integrity. They put my mother up there crying about the stress of caring for a dementia patient, about the toll it had taken on their marriage, about how they had only been trying to do the best they could. But then it was our turn. I testified for almost 4 hours. I told the jury about my childhood with Grandpa, about the grilled cheese sandwiches and the homework help and the stories on the roof. I told them about finding out he was dead, about the eulogy I had given, about the years I had spent visiting his empty grave. I told them about the phone call from the nursing home, about the 8-hour drive to Ohio, about walking into room 217 and finding my grandfather alive. I described the moment he saw me, how he had stared for a long moment, trying to place my face, how his eyes had filled with tears when he recognized me, how he had reached out his arms and said, "You came, you finally came. I knew you would not forget me." Several members of the jury were crying by the time I finished. The staff from Shady Oaks testified about his constant questions, his desperate hope that someone would come for him. Margaret, the nurse who had first brought me to his room, described how he would ask about his grandson Samuel every single day, how he kept my graduation photo on his nightstand and talked about how proud he was of me, how he had never given up hope, even when the months turned into years and no one ever came. Financial experts testified about the systematic way my father had drained every asset. They showed charts and graphs tracking the money as it flowed from my grandfather's accounts to my father's. They documented the apartment sale, showing how my father had manipulated the paperwork to acquire a $300,000 property for $50,000. A forensic accountant traced the money through various accounts, showing how my parents had used it to pay off their mortgage, renovate their kitchen, take a cruise to the Caribbean, buy new cars, and fund a lifestyle far beyond what their legitimate income could support. They had lived large on my grandfather's life savings while he sat alone in a nursing home, wondering why his family had abandoned him. The prosecution's final witness was an elder abuse expert who explained to the jury how common these cases were and how devastating. She talked about the psychological impact of abandonment, about the depression and anxiety and confusion that set in when elderly people are cut off from everyone they love. She talked about the particular cruelty of making someone believe they have been forgotten, of taking away not just their money, but their hope. The jury deliberated for 3 days. My father seemed confident during the wait, joking with his lawyers, acting like the whole thing was a minor inconvenience. My mother was more nervous, jumping every time the door opened, checking her phone obsessively. Neither of them looked at me. When the jury returned, the foreperson, a middle-aged woman with gray hair and kind eyes, read the verdicts in a clear, steady voice. Guilty, 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 on every count. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, conspiracy, everything we had charged them with. My father's composure shattered. He turned white, then red, then started shouting about how this was all a mistake, how the jury did not understand, how he would appeal. The bailiffs had to restrain him. My mother just sat there, silent, staring at nothing. My father was sentenced to 8 years in prison. My mother, who the evidence showed had been more of a passive participant, received 4 years. They were also ordered to pay full restitution, which meant everything they owned would be sold to repay what they had stolen. The civil case settled before trial. My parents, now facing prison, had no more fight left in them. They agreed to sign over all their assets. The brownstone, the cars, the investment accounts, everything. The house where I had grown up, where 4 generations of Evanses had lived, was sold at auction. I could not afford to keep it, and honestly, I did not want it. There were too many bad memories now, too much betrayal soaked into those walls. After legal fees and the nursing home bills were paid, there was enough left to ensure my grandfather would receive quality care for the rest of his life. That was all I had wanted. Not money for myself, not revenge, just the assurance that the man who had loved me unconditionally would spend his remaining days in comfort and dignity. I moved him to a better facility, closer to Boston, where I could visit him regularly. It was called Meadowview, a place with gardens and activities and staff who genuinely cared about their patients. I spent weeks finding the right place, touring facilities, asking questions, reading reviews. I was determined that my grandfather would never feel abandoned again. His room at Meadowview is nothing like the sterile cell at Shady Oaks. He has his own furniture, including the chair he used to sit in when he helped me with my homework. I brought it from the brownstone before it was sold, along with as many of his things as I could recover. His photos of Grandma are on the walls. His books are on the shelves. His vintage tools are displayed in a case by the window, even though he no longer remembers what they were for. He does not always know who I am anymore. The Alzheimer's has progressed, taking more of his memories, more of the man he used to be. Some days he thinks I am my father. Some days he thinks I am a stranger. Some days he does not speak at all, just sits in his chair and stares out the window at the garden below. But sometimes in moments of clarity, he looks at me with those bright blue eyes and says my name. Samuel, his grandson, the one who came back for him. Those moments are becoming rarer now, but they are precious. I treasure each one like a gift. My parents write to me from prison sometimes. My mother sends long letters full of apologies and explanations, asking me to forgive her, promising that things would be different if she had another chance. She talks about how she was under my father's influence, how she did not realize how bad things had gotten, how she regrets everything. She asks about Grandpa, whether he is okay, whether he ever asks about her. He does not. If he remembers her at all, he never mentions it. My father sends shorter notes, still trying to justify what they did, still unable to admit that it was wrong. He talks about the pressures they were under, the expenses they faced, the impossible choices they had to make. He never apologizes, not really. He just explains, as if explanation could somehow make it all acceptable. I do not respond to any of them. I have thought about it, wondered if forgiveness might bring me some peace, but I cannot find it in myself. Some betrayals are too deep, too fundamental, too destructive to ever fully heal. They took 2 years of my grandfather's life and filled them with loneliness and confusion. They let him believe he had been forgotten. They stole his money and staged his funeral and walked away without a backward glance. And they did not just hurt him. They hurt me too. They made me grieve for a man who was still alive. They let me cry at a grave that held nothing. They took away the time we could have had together, the conversations, the memories, the simple joy of sitting with someone you love. I think about that funeral sometimes. The eulogy I gave for a man who was still alive. The dirt I threw on an empty casket. The years I spent visiting a grave that held nothing but a lie. My parents sat in the front row at that service, wearing black, crying what I now know were crocodile tears. They watched me pour out my heart for a grandfather I thought I had lost, and they said nothing. That is the part one cannot forgive. Not the money, not even the abandonment, but the cruelty of making me believe he was dead. They took away time we can never get back. They took away the chance to hold his hand when he was scared, to tell him stories, to remind him that he was loved. They took away everything, and they did it for money. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the nursing home had not called, if the billing coordinator had not been persistent enough to track down my number, if I had ignored that unknown call from Ohio. My grandfather would have died alone in that room, wondering why Samuel never came, and I would have lived the rest of my life not knowing the truth, visiting an empty grave, mourning a man who was still breathing. The thought makes me sick, but that is not what happened. I answered the phone. I learned the truth. I drove 8 hours through the night to find my grandfather, and I have been fighting for him ever since. I am 22 now. I graduated from college last spring, and I am working at a non-profit that advocates for elder rights. It is not the career I planned. not the marketing job I had interned for, but plans change. What happened to my grandfather changed me. It made me see how vulnerable old people can be, how easily they can be exploited by the people who are supposed to protect them, how often their voices go unheard. I speak at conferences now about elder abuse, about financial exploitation, about the warning signs that families should watch for. I tell my grandfather's story, hoping that it will help someone else recognize the signs, that it will inspire someone else to ask questions, to visit their elderly relatives, to make sure they are not alone. I visit Grandpa twice a week, every week, without fail. I sit beside his bed and hold his hand and tell him about my life. Sometimes he responds, sometimes he does not. Sometimes he knows who I am. Sometimes he calls me by my father's name. It does not matter. What matters is that he is not alone. What matters is that someone came back for him. The nursing home staff tells me he is happier now. He smiles more. He sleeps better. He stopped asking why his family abandoned him, because he finally knows the answer. They did not, at least not all of them. His grandson found him. His grandson made things right. His grandson refused to let him be forgotten. I like to think that somewhere, in whatever part of his mind still holds onto the past, he knows that he is loved. I like to think that when he looks at me, even when he cannot remember my name, he feels safe. I like to think that the years we have now, however many are left, make up in some small way for the years that were stolen. They probably do not. 2 years of loneliness cannot be erased by however much time remains. The damage my parents did will never be fully undone, but I am trying. Every visit, every conversation, every moment I spend at his side, I am trying to give him back what was taken. The last time I visited, something remarkable happened. I was sitting beside his bed, telling him about my work, about a case I was helping with, about an elderly woman whose children were trying to steal her house. He listened quietly, the way he always does, his eyes fixed on some point beyond me. Then, suddenly, he turned and looked at me, really looked at me, with a clarity I had not seen in months. "Samuel," he said, "you are a good boy. You always were a good boy." The same words he used to say when I was young. The same words my grandmother's voice, recorded on an old home movie, says to my father when he was a child. Words passed down through generations, a simple expression of love and pride. I held his hand and cried. He patted my head the way he used to when I was little, when I would come to him after a nightmare or a bad day at school. For that moment, he was completely himself again. My grandfather, my protector, my family. The moment passed. His eyes clouded again, and he went back to staring at nothing. But I will carry that memory with me forever. Proof that somewhere inside, past the disease and the damage, the man who raised me is still there, still loving me, still proud. My grandmother died before I was born, so I never knew her. My parents are in prison, and even if they were not, I would have nothing to say to them. My grandfather is the only family I have left, and I am going to be there for him, the way he was always there for me, until the very end. This is what family means. Not biology, not legal obligation, not the people who happen to share your last name. Family is the people who show up, the people who do not abandon you when things get hard, the people who fight for you, even when it costs them everything. My parents were never my family. Not really. They were just people I lived with, people who fed me and clothed me and sent me to school, but who never understood what it meant to truly love someone. My grandfather taught me that. He taught me by example, by being there every day when I was growing up, by loving me unconditionally, even when my parents could not be bothered. And now it is my turn to be there for him, my turn to show up, my turn to prove that family means something more than just words. I am Samuel Evans. I was 21 years old when I discovered that my grandfather was alive after being told he was dead for 2 years. and I chose to fight for him the way he always fought for me. That is what love looks like. That is what family means. And that is the legacy I want to leave behind. Thank you for listening to my story of growing up faster than I ever wanted to. I have left 2 more stories on your screen, both from young men who learned that sometimes becoming an adult does not happen at 18. It happens the moment your family needs you to be strong. Click on whichever one speaks to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be forced to grow up overnight, that notification bell is waiting. Until tomorrow, remember, age is just a number, but courage defines who you really are.